Hello. It's not going yet. It says not started yet. Hello, everyone. How are we today? Doing well, I hope. Promised Chater I would let her know that we started. Cool. What is going on, everyone? How are you doing tonight? We are talking all about internal dialogue. Just a quick little chatty chat. Um, yeah, so I wanted to start with internal dialogue, and like some stuff that I see people do that probably not the or some things that people tend to struggle with when it comes to internal dialogue. And first off, I see that sometimes people write internal dialogue in a POV that's different than their story. And this really pulls the reader out of whatever is going on in your story at the moment, and it ends up really confusing them. So that is definitely something I try to avoid. So like if you're writing in Hey, Chater. So if you're writing in third person, internal dialogue should also be in third person, right? But I also see people struggling to figure out exactly how to approach things when it comes to internal dialogue, um, and exactly like what it should be or how it should sound. So like a lot of times the internal dialogue ends up being really shallow. We don't get a lot from our character, and it's because we don't really like maybe dig deep enough into like all of the different ways we can use internal dialogue. Okay, so I'm going to talk about just like your run-of-the-mill internal dialogue, and then I'm going to hit some spicier topics. So I'm going to talk about how to write it for sociopaths and for psychosis. So it's going to get wild, y'all. Um, First off, regular dialogue. Okay, so regular internal dialogue. We want to hear our POV character reacting to external events, right? So something happens externally, and we want our character to react to it. Okay, this becomes especially important in something like a fantasy story, where things like magic, like our characters may be experiencing magic for the first time, right? They should react, especially in their act one, to the external events that they're seeing, to the magic that they're experiencing, right? They want to see that surprise, right? That it's all new for this character. And even in like something like a romance, right? We still want characters to react to the events that are going on externally, to those plot thrusts that are forcing your characters to be together, right? So we want a reaction, okay? Another little tip for internal dialogue, your MC should also be reflecting on things that have happened either off page or in the past. So a lot of times when we're writing, we like kind of write like the reader already kind of knows our story. Like we write like they're in our brain with us and like totally understand the story that we're trying to tell. And I have to say, like it's not like that. um, we need to give them more context. So if something happened in the past and it's brought up in a scene, then we need to have your character like recall that event in their mind so that the reader can also know what happened and what is being referenced. The same thing goes for when a character's off page, right? So if something happens where we take a break because we don't need to stay with our POV character the entire story, like we can give, some time jumps between scenes. So, this is the other piece is like when something can happen off page that maybe the reader doesn't get to see, but if it's referenced in the scene that you're writing, just a quick flashback, like, oh yeah, she had remembered or he had remembered, just not too long ago they were hungry and now look, they have food, right? So something as simple as that, just give them a quick flashback, so that the reader knows exactly what's being referenced. Um, Okay, this is kind of depending on what age genre like your book is really in. So this is an internal dialogue can also be reflecting on lessons they've learned or not learning. So as our characters in Act Two, they're being tested by different things, whether it's a new relationship, whether it's their own past, whether it's by external forces testing them. Um, but along the way, our goal is that our character does learn things. And it's not always something that they say out loud that they've maybe learned. So we do want to see that that character growth is happening along the way. So what lessons have they learned in that act two? Definitely bring those up as it happens so that the reader can see that this growth is happening with the character. And that's what readers come to stories for. They come for growth, right? Or if your character is just being stubborn, the lessons that they're maybe not learning, right? Maybe your character isn't really self-aware, so they are not learning these lessons, or they are just choosing to make bad choices, right? Regular internal dialogue, we definitely still want to see decision making. So anytime your character is forced to like make a choice, we want to see them weigh their options. Why do they make the choices that they make? And all of this ends up making our story have that good causality all the way through. And that causality is when our one scene causes the next scene to happen, which causes the next scene. If we can have the reader follow those decision making of those decision points along the way, then we get that causality all the way through. Okay, almost done. So, other than decision making, we also want to have internal dialogue hit on physical sensations and sometimes emotions too. So, I kind of group these together, but like any, physical sensation, sight, smell, touch, we can definitely have that character react with internal dialogue about those physical sensations that they're experiencing. And that goes for emotions too, because a lot of times, I've said this before and I'll probably say it 100 more times, right? We want our characters to be dynamic. We don't want them to always externally say what's on their mind, right? So these physical sensations or their emotions that they're experiencing, maybe they're trying to cover these up, right? So they're trying to cover up what's going on inside to have a different external reaction. We want to see that contrast. We want to see that our character is like not being forthcoming. So that's another thing that the internal dialogue can kind of include. Okay. Any questions with this internal dialogue stuff before I get into the kind of like the nitty gritty stuff? Because I'm going to also touch on if you're ever writing like in the perspective of a sociopath or if you're writing in the perspective of somebody who's got like psychosis. Throw your questions in the chat, or not in the chat, I guess, in the thread. Write a comment. Write me a comment. Does this help? Has this been helpful for you guys already? Covering this stuff? I'd love to know that at least this is something that's a little helpful. Any question? No questions? Guys, I'm so surprised. Is this dependent on choice of POV? So I, what do you mean by choice of POV? Because I'm thinking like whether it's first person or whether it's third person. I think that is, yeah, we still want to use these same tactics and these same tools for sure. Um, like I said before, like whatever tense you're writing in, so whether you're in third person POV or first person POV, obviously first person is like I thought, or we can eliminate the I thoughts and just state what the thought is. That's how I prefer to do it. I think it's just more seamless and it keeps your character, your reader in that POV better. But we want to make sure that it matches up. So, like if we're writing in first person, we have first person internal dialogue. And then when we have third person, we're writing in third person. So, again, that's like a third party kind of like camera observing the internal dialogue of that character. Let me know if that makes sense, Daniel. And like even if we're in third person omniscient, right, where that's like third person but you're in everyone's point of view, this is like an all-knowing POV. Even in that instance we still want to have our characters reacting to these things. Good question. Oh, great question, Sophia. When writing internal dialogue for, do you use their accent? So I really do not write dialogue or internal or external phonetically. So I don't write it like the way it would sound when they speak. A lot of times, if like we're talking about, I'll use a Philly accent because that's where I grew up. But like if I'm writing a character has a Philly accent, I would say like, oh, he yelled at the cabbie, or whatever, and like whatever he yelled, like, you damn cabbie. Um, and I would say he'd said that in a thick Philly accent, is what I would probably say. So instead of like having it be the way that it should sound if there was an accent, I just say what the accent is. I find that it reads a lot cleaner. And I would say the same thing for internal dialogue, Sophia. Let me know if that answers your question. Okay, is it possible to think two different POVs at once? Like letting your mind wander for a while before going back to track without confusing the readers. So I think what you're kind of saying, Chater, like, is how long you can be in one POV, because it sounds like you're not really talking about switching point of views, right? Let me know if you're talking about switching point of views, which is fine. It's fine to switch POVs for sure. We just want to make sure we do it in a way that the reader understands that the POV is being switched. How do we go about writing it in third person? So, this is a great question, Daniel. A lot of times it is kind of hard to see. So instead of like, she thought the train was super loud. I'm typing this in the chat. So instead of like she thought the train was super loud, it would be whatever. We'll use my name. Lauren noticed the way the train shook the platform as it arrived, right? So instead of like she thought the incoming train was super loud, we would say Lauren noticed the way the train shook the platform as it arrived, something like that. And then we would just say it was way louder than she was used to hearing it, right? Um, and then in that sense, instead of it takes the she thought away, right? And we're just reading it as though we have that camera observing that POV, observing that thought process. It was louder than she had ever remembered it being. So that's how I would do it in third person POV. Um, I hope that that helps, Daniel. Sometimes it's hard to like get it. No worries, no worries, Sophia. Of course, glad I was able to answer it. And Daniel, we talked about going about writing it, like how, like the difference I just noticed. Um, Okay, which is better to catch a reader's emotion in internal dialogue, first or third person? I think it's whatever. So whether you write in first or third person point of view, I think really comes down to, I'm so sorry, my dogs. Ah! They're so nosy and so loud. So this really comes down to genre, right? So like I would not suggest writing like a crime novel in first person POV. That normally doesn't work. And that's kind of like a genre expectation across the board, really. Unless you're writing maybe like a noir, or something like that. But we just don't normally see it very often. But then, romance, we see a lot of first person, right? We see a mix of first and third. So it really comes down to whatever you prefer the most. And honestly, you can get the same amount of emotion out of it. Like I said, you just remove the I thought and you tell the experience as though, you're witnessing it going through another person. Cool, Daniel. I'm glad that helped. And Shader, like if you want to switch point of views and you're doing like a lot of internal dialogue, I recommend staying in one point of view in each scene, okay? So when I'm writing, I go scene by scene or even like sequence by sequence. And sequences are broken up into like a several scenes. But when I do that, I make sure to stay in one point of view each scene, okay? And I think I talked about this in one of a master class I did recently. But it was really just, I was saying how, we can kind of see where we are at, like word count wise in a specific scene. And if we're a little bit under, most scenes are about 2,500 words. So if we're under that, maybe this is something that we can beef up in our scene. If we're really strong at internal dialogue, we might be able to like recede a little bit, and add other elements of good writing. But if we notice that our scene's short and we don't have a ton of internal dialogue, then I definitely recommend adding more. Okay, so cool, no problem, Chater. So if you are writing someone who is sociopathic, okay, sociopaths are non-feeling. So this is also for any other character who is lacking emotional capabilities. This could be robots, could be a cyborg, it could be any character or fantasy creature that's unable to have that emotional connection, okay? You still want to have all of the external dialogue points or the internal, excuse me, dialogue points that I had listed before, that reaction to external events, things that are happening off page, lessons they've learned or not learned, decision making. The only thing that would really change is the physical sensations and probably the emotions, right? Because they don't have emotional capabilities. We really want to be careful with how we're describing physical sensations and emotions. So they cannot be empathetic, they are not sympathetic to others' emotions, but they may fake emotions externally that they've learned are socially appropriate, okay? So even though they don't feel anything inside, they might fake emotion for other people, and that's something important to know about writing in that point of view, okay? Um, and we definitely want the fact that they're not empathetic or not sympathetic to come across in their internal dialogue. We want their lack of emotional capacity to come through in their internal dialogue. So we're not saying, I feel. We are not delving deep into physical sensations. We want to keep them very moderate, okay? Or even on the light end for somebody who's a sociopath, okay? Um, but this is important to know because we might have a sociopath character or characters that just don't have a lot of feeling. If you have any questions on writing a sociopath internal dialogue, drop it in the chat, but I'm going to keep it pushing, and keep it rolling for psychosis, okay? So when I think of somebody or a main character who has psychosis, I think like, as random as their train of thought may be, we need to create some sort of pattern for these nonlinear thoughts to follow. Because if we go too far off track, our reader will be too confused, too thrown off. See you later, Chater. Thanks for coming. Um, our reader's going to be too thrown off, okay? So you still want to hit all of the internal dialogue points that we kind of already spoke about above, or before, but we really want to be careful and intentional here because it is going to be harder for readers to follow, right? So what I would say is if we're writing somebody who is in like psychosis or who's having nonlinear trains of thought, what kind of pattern can we assign their thinking? So at least the pattern stays consistent throughout the story. So then that way, even though it doesn't really make sense, the reader will get a sense of what the pattern is. They'll know sort of what to expect without really knowing or understanding, like exactly what you're doing. But it will allow them to like pick up on that pattern subconsciously and be able to follow it a little bit easier. So, for example, like maybe your MC like free associates their way to conclusions, right? That's totally fine. but the internal dialogue should follow that thought pattern, and you should do your best to keep that pattern consistent, even though it might appear inconsistent on the outside, right? So if it's a free association thing and that's how he processes information or she processes information, that's totally fine, but keep that consistent throughout the story. This can also be done to like thoughts. So maybe like when they're processing information, they are very external. So they're like looking and observing an external situation, right? And they're like, oh gosh, what could happen, right? If this happens. And then maybe they involve themselves, right? And then maybe they go back to the other person to rationalize what's going on. But whatever that kind of like, okay, they're working through things, they're looking maybe to people around them, like what should I do? How do I react? To try and process things. I definitely want, again, for that to be consistent, like throughout the story, um, because that will really help your readers at least be able to pick up on that on like a subconscious level. Do we have any questions about sociopaths or psychosis? Anything like that? If you want, drop them in the chat. Also, tomorrow I'm dropping a critical storytelling tip to my email list. So if you haven't given me your email for anything, you're not on my email list, definitely shoot me a DM with your email so that you don't miss it because it's going to be the start of like my storytelling series where I'm dropping like one new storytelling tip a week. So this is my first one. It's going to be super juicy. So definitely you're not going to want to miss it. So yeah, shoot me a DM with that. Also, guys, today is the last day to grab my new masterclass, How I Broke Through Writer's Block and Always Know What to Write Next. It's on pre-sale until midnight tonight, okay? This 2-day masterclass experience, you'll learn how to get over writer's block so that you always know where your story needs to go. You'll start literally every story with rock solid confidence that your writing is always headed in the right direction with flow and total clarity. Kick self doubt to the curb. You are going to be ready to rock and roll. Okay. So definitely DM me if you want the link to buy it. Like I said, pre sale. So this is the cheapest it's going to get, y'all. Price goes up to in a couple days. So definitely let me know and have a lovely night. If you end up watching the replay later and you have questions, throw them in the comment section and I will circle back around to answer all of them, okay? Appreciate you guys. Love you all so much. Thanks for popping in and catching this. And I can't wait to chat with you guys again soon. This is like the highlight of my week, hanging out with y'all. All right. See you again soon, guys. Bye.